Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mumey and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 335 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson. Glad to have you with us. Hope everyone is doing well as we are approaching the Thanksgiving holidays. It's going to be a weird Thanksgiving, I think, this year. And also the release of results in various jurisdictions around the country. We'll be having the Florida results coming out on November 20th. It's going to be a big state. And we're still waiting on results from large states like New York, California, and Georgia, Texas with their second exam. So a lot of information still to come. I'm going to talk for just a moment today about some results that we did just get in and try and explain part of what I think is going to be a surprising result to some people. And then we're going to conclude today's episode with an interview that we did recently with a successful Alabama bar taker, a repeat bar taker. And I think you're going to find his story really enlightening and encouraging and really something to celebrate. And so I hope you'll stick around for our interview coming up in just a few minutes. My co-host, Megan Saya, is taking the week off and trying to get ready for kids and school and Thanksgiving and all of those things. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with Megan. Now, if this is your first time on the podcast, I do want to welcome you. We're glad to have you with us. We produce these podcast episodes in video and audio formats. If you'd like to watch today's video, go to celebrationbarreview.com/335. That's the episode number. If you prefer to listen to the podcast, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, on iHeartRadio, radio.com, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, just about any place the podcasts are syndicated. But be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the episodes. We come to you about the same time every week to catch you up on what's going on in the bar exam world and share some great stories like we're going to do today and offer some tips and guidelines. So we're glad you found us and delighted to have you with us. And thanks for all of our loyal listeners who stay with us. The numbers of people that subscribe and download these podcasts continue to amaze me week after week, year after year. So thank you to all of you. Now, as I said, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today was the results that we're just getting out in a couple of jurisdictions. And of course, in the 2020 exam season, we had exams in July, we had exams in August, we had exams in September, we had exams in October. So there is a wide range of exam formats and types and release dates and information. But this week we got a couple of results in that I thought were particularly striking and I wanted to talk about them. We got results from Alabama and Maine from their exams that were given in September of 2020. Both of these exam jurisdictions gave their test on September 30th and October 1st. So this was an unusual test date. It was an in-person test date, not the online exams. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. Now, here are the results. In Alabama, the overall pass rate for the September 30th bar exam was 29.1%. That's really horrific and very disappointing. I'm going to break that set of numbers down a bit more in a moment. I want to compare that also to the earlier July 28th Alabama result, which was very good. It was 71%. So in July, it was 71%, but by September, it had dropped to 29% in Alabama. In the state of Maine, the test also September 30th and October 1st, and there the pass rate was 86%. So here's what that looks like. We have two tests given on the same date, one in Maine, one in Alabama. The Maine pass rate is 86%, and the Alabama pass rate is 29%. What's going on there? I think there's a couple of things to point out here. First of all, the sample sizes are really small. In Maine, only 108 applicants passed the exam. That's not a big number at all. In Alabama, only 44 applicants passed the exam on that test date. So again, we are talking about very small sample sizes. Now, when we break down the Alabama results, because we've got more statistics produced there from the bar examiners, what we get is a first-time pass rate in Alabama on this exam of 48% and a repeat pass rate of 11.5%. So what's happening is that of the 78 repeat bar takers that took the exam in Alabama, only 9 of them passed. Of the 73 first-timers, 35 passed. So clearly a huge drop off. And I think part of the reason for this is that a lot of folks decided in Alabama to sit for the in-person exam on July 28th and 29th. And therefore, it skewed much more heavily towards a group of people that were going to be successful. And so you've got that 71% pass rate. When we get to the September 30th date, I think you had a lot of people who deferred out of July because they were concerned or nervous or felt they weren't going to be ready, and then went in probably not in as good a shape as they should have been. I think it's also important to point out that in Alabama, there are non-accredited schools that have graduates that can take the exam. And those non-accredited schools did very poorly across the state in this exam. And I think that had an impact on the pass rates in a way that Maine didn't have to deal with. In Maine, you had to have gone to an ABA accredited and approved law school. And even though it's the same test that was given, it was the UBE in both states, Alabama and in Maine, you can see that there's a big difference. In Maine, you've got 108 applicants who are passing, 86% pass rate. Now, we don't have the breakdown yet for repeat takers and first-time takers in Maine. I'm guessing that it's mostly first-time takers there. But I think the big difference here is simply that in Maine, you had accredited law school students. In Alabama, you did not. And in Alabama, you had an option to take the exam earlier in the year, and most applicants took advantage of that. It's one of the reasons I wanted to share today's interview with you, because it is a successful Alabama bar taker, and I think it's important to hear what Chris has to say about the exam and how it went and why he was successful. In any event, I think that the bottom line for all of you who are watching and listening right now is to not read too much into these individual small state numbers. The sample size is so small that I'm not sure we can extrapolate or draw conclusions from them beyond what they mean in that individual state. In other words, I don't think we can look at the results on the UBE on September 30th in two states and say anything that's definitive about the UBE overall. And certainly for those states that gave the Plan B version of the Uniform Bar Exam on October 5th and 6th, it will be, I think, a completely different story in terms of it was a different test, cut down, given in a different format. So something to keep in mind. Obviously very interesting, though, when we get states that gave the exam a couple of different dates. Alabama was unusual in that both of their exams were given in the same format. So we'll see what happens. One other state I'd highlight for you that we've talked about previously here on the podcast is Texas gave the exam twice in two different forms. On September 9th and 10th, they gave an in-person in a hotel room kind of exam, and they had a 77% pass rate, which was great news. We're still waiting on their October 5th and 6th exam results where the exam was given online. So that'll be interesting to watch and see what happens when they went from in-person to online. So for the most part, we're just beginning to piece all of this together. It's a little bit like putting together a very complicated jigsaw puzzle. And as we get more pieces in, it'll tell us more and more. In general, the thing that I can tell you today is that the early July results were very good across the board. The results as we're starting to get September 9th and September 30th exams are considerably less impressive, Maine being a bit of an outlier with a very good result. Does that tell us anything specifically for the results still to come? Probably not. Probably each state is going to have to be measured independently. Certainly states like Florida, California that did different things, or Georgia that did completely different things from everyone else will have to be measured independently. So we'll keep you up to date as all of those results come out. Now, if all of this discussion of pass rates and states and different types of exams and formats has you reeling and spinning, I want to encourage you that there is some logic to all of this and a way to make sense out of it, and a strategy that you can follow to be successful in 2021. In fact, we've put together a free special webinar. It's called Now is the Best Time to Take the Bar Exam: Why You Should Ignore the Crowds and the Fear. And we're offering it on Saturdays at 5 p.m. Eastern, that's 2 o'clock Pacific time. And during this free training webinar, we're going to be showing you the specific strategy that we think makes sense in 2021, taking you step by step through what you need to do. Then we'll conclude with a live Q&A. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you've got about your circumstances or your jurisdiction and help you figure out the best next steps for you to take. As I said, the training is completely free. We've had thousands of people go through it since we began the start of the pandemic in March of 2020, and I would love to have you join us this coming week as well. To register, just click on the link in the show notes if you're listening to this podcast, or you'll see a button on the video page where you can link up. Or if you want more detail about the webinar, you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/now and get all the details and sign up there. And then we'll see you Saturday, 5 p.m. Eastern for this special free training. I don't want to keep you waiting any longer. I really enjoyed my conversation with an Alabama bar taker who was successful. Chris had taken the exam before. He'd really struggled with it, but he had figured out with our help how to be successful on the test. And I think his story is going to be a great encouragement for all of you. So let's go ahead and jump into this week's interview with a successful UBE Alabama bar taker. Welcome back to Hanging Out with Successful Bar Exam Takers. And I am very excited to be with a brand new, successful Alabama UBE bar taker, Chris Mcrae. Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm excited. I just said to you before we went live to record that I really wanted to get this interview out because I think in a COVID world, it's really important to have some good news. And you really got some good news this week, didn't you?
Yes, I finally passed the bar. It's been a 2-year process, but I made it.
That's great. We're so proud of you and pleased for you. I think maybe a good place for us to start today would be to just have you tell us a little bit about your story and what the journey has been in taking the bar exam, because this wasn't your first time taking the test.
No, not at all. We'll back up a little bit further than that. I started years ago thinking about going to law school and made some friends, and they got talking to me and says, yeah, you should probably go. I had 6 years in law enforcement, and they were talking about me maybe going into prosecution or doing these different types of jobs. And in this scenario, I went to law school. I had already had one son prior to going to law school, and then I had another one in law school. So that was a change in our life that I had one during law school. So anyhow, we moved forward and I finished up law school. Then first bar came along. First bar, I did not complete. In the Scantron, I missed a question or two. Had to erase the Scantron, go back, start over. And I told my professor about it and he said, you failed that one. And it sank in. I got the results and I had failed it. The second time February bar starts to roll around, I missed my application date, so I didn't get a chance to take the February bar. July rolls around, take that bar exam, and I refused to basically write essays. I wanted to try to make my score on multiple choice go up. That didn't work out. And I think that's the point in time I contacted you.
You came in and you had, your scores were, good on multiple choice. You were having trouble on the written work, and you were still a pretty good distance away from the passing score that you need. And in Alabama, it's a 260. That's passing. Okay. So what happened then?
After that, I started using your program. One time where I scored once again, the third bar, I scored a 139.6. I was 0.4 of a point from testing out in Alabama for multiple choice. I didn't write my essays, and I wasn't planning to write essays at that point in time or practice writing them. And I realized I've got to start practicing essays. And I did. And I continued to study the MBE side, that I knew if I could make up more points on the MBE still, that I wouldn't have to stress as much about the essay, but I still wrote essays. And this time I got a notification. I went on 146.6 on the MBE side. And after that notification come through that I passed the bar exam, I was ecstatic, to say the least.
Yeah, I bet you were. We'll talk about that moment in a few minutes, but that's a big deal. So your overall score then turned out to be what?
Somewhere around 266, I want to say. Maybe okay. 264, 266.
Yeah, and at those numbers, not only do you pass the Alabama bar, but you pass into and can waive into some other jurisdictions and states. How did that make you feel? It's a long journey. You had to go through a lot to get there. What's the feeling at that moment?
Oh, man. A sigh of relief, for one. Put my life on hold, and I stepped back into the construction world. You can't, for me, having a law degree is basically useless until you pass the bar exam, because nobody will hire you. Nobody wants to speak to you because you haven't passed the bar. I talked to probably, if I had to guess, probably in a range of 6 different attorneys about coming to work with them just to learn the trade and start getting acclimated to working. They told me, we're not going to hire you because you've already been through law school you just haven't passed the bar exam, so we're not going to hire you until you do. And my life was put on hold.
Yeah, and that's a pretty tough thing. And with a family, and I want to focus on this for a little bit, what was it like for your wife and your family, for you, not just going through law school, but being in this bar exam process for a couple of years?
It was tough. The first time, it was devastating. The second time, I actually couldn't take the bar exam. It was even more of a struggle then because I had to wait a little while longer. And then you miss it again, and my wife's a registered nurse, so she works 12-hour shifts. I have to take care of the kids, take them to school, take them to daycare. And of course, coronavirus hit. And this is a whole nother ball game now, but she had corona patients. So we had to adjust our lifestyle here. And I just worked kind of part-time in the construction world, or carpentry work is what I've done in the past as well. I fell back into it so I could make money to pay our bills. And it's been a little bit of stress here. It's not easy, but it's life. You take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, really challenging. Let's talk a little bit about taking the test in the coronavirus world, because Alabama gave an in-person test. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like and the setting and sort of your feelings around that?
I'll be honest with you. I felt like it was the best bar exam you could have ever sat for. Everybody was social distancing. You had a 6-foot mandate, so you walked through the doors. There wasn't a lot of people standing around outside talking. Yeah, you had your Alabama students in one section talking to each other, and then you had Cumberland, but it wasn't a large mingle of people. They brought you in waves, so they start bringing you in at 7:30, I want to say, or so, and then they bring a first section in, and they bring another section in. You go in and get your temperature checked. They actually allow for you to push the bar back into, I believe, sometime coming up here in a few days, October. And a friend of mine actually decided he would push back to the following bar exam because he just didn't feel like he had put enough time into studying for the bar. But going back to taking the exam, I was used to having somebody right next to me, or somebody I would talk to in the process of sitting around and waiting. But this time, they tell you don't talk to people. Don't communicate about what you've seen on the exam. In prior exams, people would get together and, how did you feel about this, or how did you feel about that? And you'd have to be a little rude and shun them and say, I don't really want to talk about it right now. But this time you didn't have to worry about it. Nobody wanted to speak to you anyway. So you just come through, take the thing, and go home.
Yeah, that's nice. There were fewer people taking the exam than usual. Yeah. And the feedback I've gotten has felt more relaxed, more personal in a sense, because it was fewer people and socially distanced. Let's talk a little bit about why you decided to take the exam in July rather than taking the option that Alabama offered and that other states have offered for the later fall test. What was your reasoning for going for the test at that point?
Let's back up to last year's July bar. Prior to then, my grandfather was in bad shape. He was sick, and I didn't study like I should have last year, but I took it anyway in July. As I have a law enforcement background, a friend of mine, William Beekner, was killed in May in the line of duty, and I don't think I studied much during that time frame either. I was a little concerned for his wife and stuff, and even though I hadn't really met her, I was still preparing for the bar, but not like I should have. This time I felt like I've been studying, and there's no time like the current, so let's just take it and get it over with. This is what I called my last shot. And it was really a decision of, I've been studying for months for this July bar. So it's time to do it.
Yeah. And how many hours a week would you say you were studying leading up to the July bar?
Oh, man, probably, I would say between 40 and 45 hours. Okay. I would give myself time to spend time with my kids and spend time with my wife. I even took a trip in the middle of the bar studies this time. So I didn't feel as stressed going in.
And so your wife being a registered nurse, dealing with COVID patients, you're aware of the physical risks. Did you have concerns about that going into the test?
Honestly, no. I felt like the state had a pretty good plan. Alabama, you go in, they want you to wear your mask, bring your hand sanitizer if you want. So as far as health risks were concerned, I was more concerned. I felt a little more concerned about being around my wife than I did other people. But we found out that she's pregnant prior to that. I built her a containment room in this house. So when she come in, I had it depressurized because I had a construction background. I depressurized the room and had her, go in there and take your clothes off and wash your stuff and don't come out and see us until it's over. So
that's a novel. Yes, that's a novel approach. Congratulations. So this will be child number 3.
Yes, he's due. Another boy. He was due in January.
That's great. What a great season this has been for you and your family. I want to focus a little bit on what you did differently in studying for the July exam and why, when you come close, as you did previously, I remember talking with you at that point and you were discouraged, but you weren't going to give up. And we talked about the need to do things differently. Can you talk a little bit about what that meant for you in your situation?
We can all talk about MasterClass and we can talk about the different programs that you offer. But for me, it was taking in the reality of focusing on the subjects that I had done the worst in on the prior administrations. And it was a consistent thing. I knew that real property I struggled in. I knew that I had a bias in criminal law because I had a criminal law background. I knew that people don't get prosecuted or they work out plea bargainings and things like that in real life. So I had to separate myself from the black letter law and the way the real world works. For me, it was going back to those areas and spending another 2 weeks on, and I had the time to do it. So I took that opportunity to focus on those weak areas, and I think that's what put me in this realm.
Yeah, you mentioned mind maps. Did you use mind maps?
That's maps.
Okay. And that's something we talk about in the course a lot. What was the impact of using mind maps for you this time around?
They did have a couple of tricks in the essay portion, and you probably heard about them. They gave a question involving real property along with some other constitutional law type flair to it. So it gives you an opportunity, in my mind, to connect the dots. The real property question that they proposed began as a little weird. I don't exactly remember how it went, but it was not normal. And then they got to talking about fixtures down at the bottom of it. And anyhow, when I was using the mind maps, I was thinking maybe I need to go and try to connect the dots. So that was my big thing, was how do these areas of law form with the rest of them? And that's what I've done. It just helped me out, drawing them out, making my notes and doodle or whatever I was doing at that point in time in the pages. So it was great.
That's terrific. Let's talk a little bit about the multi-state exam, because the way the July test went, you took a full-length 200-question MBE. You had the 6 essays and the 1 performance test. Your score on the multi-state was really strong, wasn't it?
Yeah, 146.6.
Okay. So that means that you got probably about 138, maybe 140 raw questions correct out of the 175 that counted. Talk a little bit about your approach to answering multiple choice questions, if you would.
Yeah, that's where I had to learn from the first time. When I do my multiple choice questions, when I read the call to question, I'm already thinking about what answers fall into these categories. And it comes second nature after you've done it for so long. One big thing for me was I stopped reading the question and going to the Scantron. What I would do taking the exam is I'd read the question and I would circle in the booklet the answer that I was going to put on the Scantron. And I'd do my 20 questions or 25, whatever lines up in that Scantron block. I think it was 20 questions. So I would do my 20 and then I would go and fill in a Scantron. And it saves on average about 2 minutes per 20 because you're not looking at the question, looking at the Scantron, going back to check that same question. You're just looking and going, looking and going. And then at the end of the 20, you just go in and block them all in. That's just the exam taking portion of it that I had to learn from the first one. The actual study of law is very pertinent, but I did probably, I'm not going to be ashamed to tell you, Jackson, I probably did 3,000 multiple choice questions. I never stopped studying them. So that was my strategy, was to keep doing them. That's
great. So you take the test, You leave the test site. What's your feeling at that point after 2 days of testing and all the strangeness and weirdness? What's the reaction then?
Once again, I felt good, but I didn't know exactly how to feel good because previously I had failed, or I shouldn't say failed, I didn't pass the mark. After those two, or after this one, I went home. My wife's like, "How do you feel?" And I said, "I'm neutral." I said, "It was some odd things they did in the essay portion, but I don't feel bad about it." I was in the group of people that were like, I would say, less concerned about the passing side of it this time because I had done so much work. And I said, "I'm going to put it in God's hands. It's up to him whether I go or not." And so I wasn't really stressed as much about the outcome this time as I was previously.
And what was it like when results came out? Tell us about that moment.
Man, it was a sigh of relief. I think most of my neighbors could hear me. To this moment, I don't even think it's actually sat in that I have passed the bar exam. I'll be honest with you, because it's just been a couple of days. One thing is one big sigh of relief that now I have the opportunity to go forward. Immediately after finding out, I started getting text messages from friends. "Hey, congratulations," and Facebook messages. And then I went on to Facebook and I posted that I'd passed the bar exam, and just an outpour of love from people. And now it's just the opportunity to put it to work.
Yeah, it's a great moment for sure. There are a lot of people who have taken and failed the bar. There are a lot of people who are concerned about taking the exam in the COVID world. What advice would you give to people who are struggling with what to do right now? What would you tell them based on where you are right now?
Do not give up. One thing you have to do is you have to push forward. Accept defeat. You have been defeated. It is time now to go into the areas of which you were the weakest at or have been the weakest at over this period of time and move forward. Don't stress about the COVID. It's a realistic thing. It can hurt you. It can hurt other people. But the way that they had Alabama set up, I would not be afraid to take that exam again in these situations.
Yeah, I think that's really good to hear, and I think that's encouraging for people. Any advice you would give to people about Celebration Bar Review and about how the course worked for you? And I'm not asking you to say nice things. I just want to get your feedback because I know that's obviously a question that people want to know is what bar review course did you use and did it work for you or how did it work?
Your materials were good. Selling materials were great. One thing that I really like is just the books, the way it was laid out. So I continued to use the same books, even though that I had them marked up. I've still got them over here in my box. If I need to pull them out, I could. But the material's fantastic. Your videos are great. What I would do, I know you said don't take notes while you're watching my videos. I couldn't help it. I still took notes. That's just my fallback because if I pull out this notebook right here, I can show you. I've got 2 notebooks of notes where I took them from videos. But that's just my style of studying. That's just something I've grown accustomed to doing. But as far as outside of the materials, you guys have connections on Facebook. When you open up the opportunity for people to see other bar takers who haven't made it, you even had one that I think was 20 years later, he decided to use Celebration and pass the bar exam in another jurisdiction. But the words of encouragement from you guys, the podcast that you do, it is all wonderful. You don't see another bar prep course that's, "Hey, we're here to help you. If you have questions, contact us." Then you have a group on Facebook that you can ask questions to. And the study group is wonderful. I've been a member of it from probably right after I started Celebration, and I go through and I'll read everybody's questions. I may not answer anything unless I feel positive that I'll know the answer, but just the ability to have those communications has been great to me. And then you just send out at some point in time, I think you were doing daily notifications to me. "Hey, how do you feel? Here's words of encouragement." And it's just wonderful. This is the only bar prep class, even though I didn't buy further into the bar prep class, it was still wonderful to get those notifications, videos, feedback, just having the ability to get that information out there.
That's great. I appreciate that. Yeah, you purchased our most economical program called the Basic Course, and then you took advantage of what we call a lifetime pass guarantee. So when you weren't successful, you were able to stay in the course, receive all the same benefits and materials, and keep studying and keep working. And I think that the question that I like to ask people at this point is, now looking back on all of it, was it worthwhile? In other words, now that you've gotten this pass result, was it worthwhile to go through everything you had to go through to be here today?
Absolutely, without a shadow of doubt. Like I said, I've had the door closed in my face more than once about going to work for somebody. And this opens up another world of opportunities. You would have thought that going to law school that you can still find a JD Advantage position. It's not going to happen. I shouldn't say it's not going to happen. It is few and far between that you're going to land a job with JD Advantage. With Celebration, it was wonderful when I started and got my books, and you kept me in those live classes. Even when I got a bad letter in the mail, I kept that video and audio because I use my cell phone a lot to travel with. So I'll use either the internet browser. I don't know if y'all have an app out or not, a cell phone app. But
yeah, no app. We don't have an app.
I couldn't find one, so I wasn't sure, and I didn't ask, but I use the browser, and I use the audio portions of the browser inside Celebration to travel with, and I would listen to those areas of law in which you've already had. Some of them were over 3 hours in lecture. So it was good for me when I traveled my 3.5, 4 hour distance, and I could just listen to you talk while I'm traveling, even though I couldn't take my notes. So it was a wonderful situation to have access to continuously.
That's great. I'm so delighted for you, Chris, and for your family. It sounds like a great opportunity, a great time coming for you and your growing family. And I'm so glad that you could be part of our course. You mentioned the Facebook group. I hope you'll stay in that group and continue to offer assistance as our passing students so often do. Any final words that you want to share with our audience? I know a lot of people are going to be really inspired by your story and what you've done. But anything in particular you want to share with them before we wrap up here today?
I'm going to continue to say, do not give up. I followed your recommended path. You have an outline given to you to study that law, to put it in practice. Do it. Follow the layout in which Celebration provides. You're going to pass the bar. It's just a matter of when, and I didn't give up. So even though I'm a multiple taker, I didn't give up.
And I think that quality of never giving up is what's going to make you a terrific member of the bar. So I'm really proud of you and pleased for you. I'm glad that you and your family are healthy and that you've gotten this great result. Chris, I want to thank you again for sharing your story with us and being open about the struggle and the challenge. I know you're going to really encourage a lot of folks that are watching and listening. Thanks so much to all of you in our audience. Thank you for being with us. I hope this was as exciting for you as it is for me to hear. And with that, we're going to go ahead and sign off. We'll be back with you again soon with another Hanging Out with a Successful Student. But for now, thanks and congratulations again, Chris.
Thank you.
All right. That's our episode for this week. I hope you enjoyed that discussion with Chris. He's quite a guy, and we wish him all the best. I just want to remind you before we sign off today that we do have our special free training webinar. Now is the best time to take the bar exam. Coming up Saturday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 o'clock Pacific time. Make sure you sign up either in the show notes or with the button at the bottom of the video page or by going to celebrationbarreview.com/now. Remember, there's a live Q&A at the end of that webinar where we can talk about your specific situation. We'll update you on what's going on around the country. I hope everybody has a great week and weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you next week here on the podcast. And for now, we'll say goodbye. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for listening and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.